These days, everyone wants to be an entrepreneur. You've probably seen someone on social media talking about investing, crypto, or how to start a business. But the reality is that's usually the 1% of people who've actually made it, not the average person. Today, we're chatting with Martelle and Michael from I Count Beans, Accountants and Bookkeepers, to look at what the books of the average Australian can actually tell us, and to de-influence you on some of the hot topics making the rounds online. I Count Beans, Accountants and Bookkeepers. Okay, so AI is all anyone talks about right now. It's changing industries everywhere, including accounting and bookkeeping. What's your guys' opinion on it?
Well, I think AI could be really helpful. I mean, we use AI in softwares like Dext, for example. It's kind of built in there to help speed up processes and improve efficiency.
And I think also with growing businesses, the few cons of AI is probably that if you've got more complex transactions, then you have a risk that the automatic coding that AI does could create errors. So that can sort of create problems down the track. So that's something to be considered when trying to utilize AI in the business. I also think one of the big risks of AI at the moment is cybersecurity. So if you automate things too much and you've got your expenses directly going to, an AI bot or whatever, the problem is if someone is trying to maliciously infiltrate your system with like a fake invoice and you don't have a human there to be like a safeguard, then the risk is that'll go straight through the system and you'll pay the wrong person. So I think with larger businesses, especially if you've got payables and multiple people in your business, you just got to be really careful with the cybersecurity side of things.
I've been hearing lots of people online talk about investing. What's your guys' opinion on investing?
Well, we're not licensed financial planners, so to speak. So we don't give investment advice, like where you should put your money specifically into like stocks or crypto or property. That's not our division. But some things you want to be consider. A lot of people are giving advice online now, especially in podcasts and different social media, but just make sure that the people that are giving advice to you are licensed. They understand what they're talking about and they're credible. And it's not just a get rich quick scheme that people are sort of just saying off the cuff.
Yeah, for sure. And something we always tell people is it's best to like set aside a peace of mind fund before you start investing. So that way you're not like really desperate if things don't go the way you expected them to.
Yeah. And like a peace of mind fund is something like, for example, rather than trying to live week to week and also trying to invest, save, say, 4 weeks or ideally at least 8 weeks. So you got 2 months of your overall living costs banked away. So that way, when you start to consider things like investing, something comes up, you get sick, there's an injury, whatever, your business is interrupted by some change, you're not going to be struggling too much and you've got that little bit of buffer.
Yeah, it just gives you that like breathing space. Also, it'll just help manage the stress and protect like your mental health while, you're entering that investment space. Because, sometimes that can take time to see results. And yeah, it's especially important to have that peace of mind fund if you are a business owner.
Okay, so we're in a cost of living crisis and most people won't have a peace of mind fund. Where should they start?
Well, I think this is mentioned a lot, but budgeting is really the key. And a lot of people hear that and go, all right, well, okay, but how do I actually do a budget? So what you want to do in principle is you want to work out where is your money going. So you want to do a bit of an audit of where you're spending your money. So personally, look at your personal bank accounts for a couple of months, write down where you're spending all your money on the different areas, and then you'll actually know where your money's going. So then you can work out what iterations you can make.
Yeah. I think that there's like an old saying, but it's true. Like if you fail to plan, then you plan to fail. So I think you need to, like Michael said, you need to sit down and actually do a physical budget. And there's heaps of tools available. Like you'll notice a lot of banks now, they offer detailed graphs of your spending, even just on your mobile app. Or, there's apps that can track and categorize your expenses, what you're spending money on. Even if you utilize like accounting software such as Xero, you can always see at a glance where everything's sitting. And even the ATO has like a downloadable budget template. It's actually pretty good. It's worth checking out.
Well, do you have any other practical tips for managing your money?
If you're running a business, most people have things like GST, pay-as-you-go, which is the tax on your staff wages, super, income tax. There's all these taxes, which is super complicated and they get really confusing for business owners. So one really good rule of thumb is whatever you're invoicing to your customers, your top line, your sales, let's say you invoice $10,000 in a week. Put aside 30% of that, in this example, would be $3,000 into a savings account. So that 30% rule on what you turn over is a really good rule of thumb to cover all those costs. It's not an exact science, but if you do that, you'll be ahead of 80% of people that are not putting any money away for taxes. So it's a really good starting point.
Yeah. And I think also having a separate business bank account with its own debit card, it can just keep all your finances organized. You might find it can even lower a bookkeeping fee, if you're paying for a bookkeeper, because the more organized it is, less time spent reconciling. Also makes it easier for you to search for transactions. So for example, if you're trying to find, a client payment, it's a lot easier to see. And then from that separate business bank account, you can transfer yourself a wage to live on. So then you're keeping all your personal expenses separate from the business. And that's, huge, especially if you're trying to apply for a home loan. Banks love people that are organised with their finances.
We find that one of the biggest problems with businesses, especially when they're starting off, is that they're mixing everything together. So having your business income expenses fully mixed in with your personal expenses, everything's lumped in, it's a huge problem. So before you start a business, make sure you do that. You have your business run as a business, and then you transfer yourself a wage each week to live off, and then pay for all your personal stuff out of that. Now, the wage doesn't have to be a standard payroll wage. It could be dividend. It could be a whole of different combinations, but the principle is the same irrespective of any year structure. Business, keep it to business in its own bank accounts. Personal, keep your personal over in its personal place. And the reason you want to do that is because you want to see where the bleeding's coming from. So your business might be making really good money, but your personal life is really expensive. So you might think, oh, my business is not making money, I can't get anywhere. The reality is maybe it's your personal spending. And if you don't have that clearly separated, you're just not going to know. So that's the first place to start.
So you touched on home loans earlier. Do you have any tips on how to help get approved for a home loan?
We're not specifically mortgage brokers ourselves, but we are heavily involved in the process of the pre-approval stage. So your mortgage broker, most people will use a mortgage broker when they're trying to get finance. And the mortgage broker will usually deal with an accountant, especially if you run a business. They'll liaise with your accountant, and your accountant will help provide the information you need. Now, some of the things we see very often each time someone's going for a loan application is things like, are you up to date with all your taxes? Firstly, so get your lodgements up to date. Do you have a tax debt? So if you've already got an ATO debt and then you're trying to go for a loan, that's not a good strategy. So it's better off to get rid of your debts first with the ATO, then go down the pre-approval stage. Also, other things you want to consider about when you're going for finance is things like discretionary spending habits. Like if you're spending a lot of money on Uber Eats, you've got lots of afterpay payments coming out, you've got short-term finance on personal decisions you've made, all that, it creates like a personality profile. So you want to have a personality profile that the banks want to lend money to. So you want to have savings, you want to try and be as low debt as possible, and you don't want to have too many silly purchases before you get the loan. So even things like you want to buy a jet ski, right? Or you want to buy a motorbike, that's fine. But get your house first, get your pre-approval, get that done, then go buy the toys, because that may limit your borrowing capacity if you've got another loan for a toy, for example.
I feel like you did that yourself, Michael. Hey, made sure you got the house first before you got anything else.
That's right.
So many Aussies are talking about how tough the housing market is right now. What would you say?
Well, I feel like the housing market, it can be out of reach for some people now. I think that's just a fact. But the problem is that what we're noticing is people then just totally give up. So they're just like, why bother? So they're not making very smart decisions with their money, which means that if and when things do change in the housing market, they won't be ready to jump on any opportunities because, they don't have any money put away.
And that's the real thing. Like opportunity cost is really what we're talking about here. So if you save money now, and granted, you might not be making much on your savings. Maybe it's just a few % of interest you're making on that savings. But by putting away all that money and being ready, when the big opportunity comes in the future and you can make that one move on that property, that factory, whatever it is you want to buy, that's actually going to make a long-term difference, you're ready. Now, the problem is if everyone else is not ready, so they don't have their savings, they've been on holidays, they've been spending all this money out, when it comes to a good opportunity in the future, they don't have the ducks in a row. But if you've got that cash saved, you can move quickly. You'll be able to get more finance, which means the actual transaction you really want to do that makes the biggest difference, you can jump on.
So savings is really important then.
Yeah, I think savings is underrated at the moment. I think people focusing too heavily on missing out on return on investment, so like the percentage return, and not enough about, well, what does the savings leverage you to be able to do? And often when we're hearing people online, they're the top 1% of people. You know, a lot of the influencers you hear that are making millions of dollars, they've already done this step years ago. So they're ahead. So it's really important. We're talking about the average Australian business owner, trying to give real applicable advice to them to how to get started, how to get into the market, how to get into these kind of things that make a difference. And pretty much everyone in the early days saved money, got their fund ready to go, and then made their transactions. Then once they're already set up with their finances and they've got their house, they've got their investments, they have the ability to use their other discretionary spending on higher risk assets and things like that. So, but bringing it back to the start, saving money really gives you an opportunity to jump on opportunities.
Yeah, I think people do often underestimate like how good it can be to have that liquid cash, because like we said, when opportunities arise, then you can move fast if you have those savings available.
Yeah, it's interesting. People in the Australian economy you just keep hearing it's doomed. And I'm going to pack up and move overseas to avoid some taxes. What do you think about that?
Well, you just got to be really careful. I know some people, especially a lot of influencers and freelancers, are moving overseas, and you see that a lot online at the moment. It's a big thing. But you just got to be so careful. Like, for example, if you're listening to influencers in the UK or America, their rules and their tax system is completely different to Australia. And so even Australian influencers that do move overseas, you just got to be so careful. There's quite detailed rules around, you know, what it means to be a resident for tax purposes in Australia. So speak to your accountants, get some proper advice before you make such a big move, because it can impact a lot of things like healthcare, what happens with properties, your business is still here. So yeah, it's not as simple as just packing your bags and going to Bali. So yeah, it's more complicated. So get proper advice on that before you make a decision.
Well, this could be another controversial question. What about crypto?
One of the things that we noticed that's a bit of misconception is that crypto is not tax-free. So just because you buy and sell crypto doesn't mean that you can just, the wins of that, you know, are tax-free. And just because you haven't converted that to dollars and you're buying and selling within your crypto exchanges, that doesn't mean it's tax-free. So what happens when you do a crypto transaction? The ATO is notified now. So when we do your tax, we can see that there was some transactions done for crypto. So it's really important you speak to your accountant before you do any like buying and selling in crypto to make sure that you're timing right, that you understand the tax implications and how that affects you.
And people on social media are claiming to be making all this money now online. What do you guys think about that?
I think people who are making their money online, say in social media, they're often then talking about how much money they've made, which in a way I understand. They're kind of like, you know, they've got to show proof. But I think, you know, when people are talking about like, oh, well, I made this much revenue this month, or I made this much in my first year of doing this, we're not actually seeing how much they're getting in their pocket, how much they're actually walking away with, because turnover is very different to net profit. So that isn't always like as transparent as they're making out that they're being.
Serious business owners, you know, they don't really share their net profit very often because it's quite private. Turnover is probably less of a private matter, so people like to flex that. So you might be turning over $10, $20 million in sales and making nothing to take home. So the reality is you've got to be so careful when you hear people talking about their top line. It doesn't matter. You can turn over millions of dollars and make nothing. So it's the bottom line that matters. So what do you have after all your expenses, everything's paid? What's your net profit? That's really what makes the difference. And often the other thing is too, like a lot of the businesses online that people are talking about, you know, these get rich quick concepts, you know, they're making X in 1 month, right? But that's all fine. A lot of these businesses, they last for a short period of time and then kind of peter out. So often, traditionally, for most businesses, serious businesses take time to build. So they're built over years. And the benefits that the owners get of those businesses is having that long-term result. So, you know, 10, 15, 20-year businesses, your benefits that you make from that, you're not going to be in the first few years, but you're going to get long-term benefits. So being patient, and often boring businesses are some of the best businesses. So the businesses that you don't want to talk about, you might be selling little screws or widgets or some, buckets even, but those kind of businesses that, are not that interesting to talk about often make the most money.
And I think with people online or on social media who are making money, we also don't know what's going on behind the scenes. Like, for example, they might have had a bit of a leg up to get started. Maybe they had an inheritance. Maybe they had someone give them some money. Or on the other end of that spectrum, they might have lots of money coming in, but for all we know, they could have crippling tax debt or this massive credit card debt. But, no one wants to talk about that on social media, not really a vibe. So we're only seeing like the best bits of their life.
That's so true. Another hot topic on the internet is credit cards and point hacking. Do you think it's worth it?
Yeah, I feel like this is such a divisive topic. I feel like even in couples, you can see like one loves the point hacking, one hates. I feel like even within our business, certain people are all for it, certain people hate it. I think you just have to know yourself. I think if you can be like, am I organized and disciplined? Like, do I stick to a budget? Am I the type to remember due dates? And, do I have a really steady, consistent income? I think then the point hacking can work and credit cards can be beneficial.
Yeah, I'm probably more of the other camp that's a bit more pessimistic about credit cards. I think, like Martelle said, there's definitely a place for a certain personality type to maximize it. But let's not kid ourselves. Most people are not diligent enough to do it the exact way to fully maximize. And so what we see a lot of the time is a lot of people end up in credit card debt. So, if you end up with credit card debt and you're paying interest on that credit card, it's usually really high. And that interest and the penalties from paying late is going to be a lot more costly than the points benefit you're going to get. The other thing I feel like with credit cards, it's a psychological thing too. So when you have to spend actual money out of your bank on something, you feel that. You see it's gone and you've only got so much in there, especially now in the cost of living crisis, cash flow. Not many people have very good cash flow. So, actually spending the money out of your bank, you feel that. Whereas a credit card, it defers it. So one of the issues I have with credit card is psychologically you spend more money, I believe, because you're postponing the real terms of that purchase. And the other thing too, let's talk about businesses, right? A lot of businesses now use credit cards to get points and some do it really well and some don't do it too well. So one of the things that doesn't work really well, in my opinion, is if you're paying your supplier account. So let's say you've got, electrician, you've got an Ideal electrical account, whatever the supplier is, and you want to pay them at the end of the month with your credit card. Now, often suppliers will charge you a merchant fee, which is a credit card surcharge to use a credit card to pay their account. Now, you need to make sure that that surcharge isn't costing you more than the points. Because if you're paying money out in surcharges that's costing you more than the actual points benefit you're getting, it's not really worth doing. So this is the things you got to weigh up, So it's there's a few hidden costs with using credit cards.
I think just if you're gonna go down that road of the point hacking, I just think there's a lot of factors you have to be aware of, with the merchant fees, stuff like that. But I think if you do it right, then it can really help with your cash flow. I do also think you get to kind of leverage your everyday spending because it's you've got to buy groceries anyway. You've got to pay bills anyway. Or, if it's a business credit card, you've got to pay these suppliers. It's well, why shouldn't I get the points? Why shouldn't I get to leverage that and then, save on traveling or enjoy all those loyalty perks? So, yeah, there's definitely lots of pros and cons.
And I think too, what's your time worth? You've got to value your time. So if you're spending too much time and mental energy trying to points hack, you can think, well, is that time better spent just focusing on growing my business? What is absorbing my mental energy? So if you're going to use points hacking, you're going to try and use credit cards for your business to maximize it. Try and use tools that are going to fast track it. For example, we're not affiliated with them, but I've noticed that a lot of clients recently use pay.com.au, which is a service that you can use credit cards to pay supplier bills. Things like that could be beneficial in that you're making the process of paying suppliers faster. If you're having to call up your suppliers on the phone, pay by credit card, there's a lot of admin costs in doing that too. So you want to reduce that. So use tools to make it more efficient if you're going to use it so it doesn't take up too much time or mental energy.
Okay, so you've mentioned you're not mortgage brokers, but what's the difference between an accountant, a bookkeeper, a financial advisor, a lawyer? Where do they all come in?
If you're trying to grow your business and you really need to have a good team behind you. So successful business owners that move quickly through transactions have a team ready to go so that they can move very fast on things. Let's talk about our side of things. So we're accountants and bookkeepers. So an accountant, when you think accountant, think your tax. So tax-related issues. Accountant also gets involved if you need advice for any kind of buying and selling in transactions to make sure it's done structured correctly. So things like asset protection, that's accountant. Things like if you're buying and selling a business, giving you the right advice on the finance side of things, like are the figures correct? What can we look into? That's also an accountant would deal with that. Versus a bookkeeper would think day-to-day. So bookkeeper would be like day-to-day receipts, reconciling expenses, paying wages, paying super, invoicing. That's really more the bookkeeping. So like the day-to-day admin.
And then as opposed to like say a licensed financial advisor, they're focusing more on like wealth creation or your retirement planning, investing, kind of bigger picture stuff. And then obviously a lawyer, they're really just, you get them involved if you're signing any type of contract or if you've got intellectual property that you want to protect or even just to find out what your legal obligations are as a business.
So how do I know if I need an accountant or a bookkeeper or both?
Well, I think you'd probably need a bookkeeper if you're spending a lot of time on that financial admin. So, like we said, with the invoicing, with reconciling, maybe payroll. Also, if you're struggling to track your debtors, keeping on top of cash flow, or if you're really behind in your ATO lodgements. Or it just might be something that you don't like doing, to be honest. We get a lot of people coming to us because it's just not their wheelhouse. Like they don't enjoy doing it. It takes up so much of their time. They would rather give that task to someone else so they can focus on the business. I mean, like we live in a world where a lot of people, they get like meals delivered or they might hire a cleaner or they just optimizing their time by kind of putting those services onto somebody else. So yeah, then they can focus on their business and doing what would make them more money.
And you definitely need an accountant if you run a business, especially if you run a business that's registered with GST. So you've got a certain size business to be registered with GST, then you definitely need an accountant. There's so many things in business that you need advice on. Even when you first start a business, how you structure that's really important. You don't want to structure the wrong type of entity and then have to unwind it later. So that's really important. So, I see a lot of people doing that wrong at the moment in Queensland, especially with everything with QBCC, so the different licensing. You've got to see an accountant before you start doing things so it's set up correctly. And also that can affect you for your risk levels. So if you're in a certain riskier business, you want to try and make sure your business risk doesn't affect your personal assets. So really important that you speak to an accountant up front and get that ready and set up before you start trading. Also, an accountant's fantastic for tax minimization. So if you're thinking about planning ahead, it's really not good to see an accountant after the year's finished. Successful business owners see their accountant before the year finishes. You need a plan before you're done because there's only so much you can do after the year's finished. If you work on your tax before the year finishes, then you can get actual strategies in place before it's done.
So it sounds like having both an accountant and a bookkeeper is really valuable.
Yeah. And I mean, ideally they would be under one roof, like with iCountBeans. I mean, that way you're just avoiding any information getting lost and also prevents you from being the middleman, always having to relay information between your bookkeeper and your accountant.
Okay, so it sounds like iCountBeans is a one-stop shop. What else sets iCountBeans apart?
So iCountBeans, we're business-focused accountants. So within your accountants, you've got special accountants that would do maybe retirees. You've got accountants that focus on individuals. And then you've got accountants that focus on businesses. So we're a business-focused accountant, so that's our specialty. And we can help you from the whole day-to-day bookkeeping all the way through to tax. And we've been doing that for over 10 years now. So we understand all the different apps that plug into your software. We can tell you the right ones to use, what point of sale things to use, payroll. So we can make sure that you're set up correctly for all your payroll laws. That's very complicated in Australia with a lot of the changes happening all the time. So if you're employing staff in Australia, you definitely need someone who's involved in the day-to-day to make sure that you get that correctly. That's really important. And because we've got that one all in-house, you get a single point of contact as well. So in a traditional sense, back in the day, you used to have a bookkeeper, and then you have a tax accountant, and you'd be the business owner. And you would have to play middleman between both often. And often the bookkeeper wouldn't communicate with the accountant would do stuff, not communicate with the bookkeeper. It's just you're managing all this admin. The other thing is the accountant often had their own software they did their stuff in. The bookkeeper uses this software and nothing's ever up to date. So with us, we use Xero. Everything's in Xero. It's all relevant and live. So if you're going to go bank finance or anything like throughout the year, we've got it ready to go for you.
And we actually operate on a bit of like a subscription model. Just means that there's no nasty surprises at the end of the year when it comes to the bill. So unlike like traditional accountants, we're not charging per hour, per job. What we do is we sit down and we get to know your business a bit better, what it needs, and then we create a custom weekly fixed fee for you. So yeah, it's really good for cash flow. It also means you're not going to get charged if you reach out to any of us. It means you've got unlimited access to the whole team throughout the whole year. And you might actually find that like what our minimum fee starts at, it could honestly be cheaper than your hourly rate.
And everyone's time poor now. Like we've never had so much to do. So this is one area of your business that you can simply outsource to professionals. And like we said, it's very cost effective, often cheaper per hour than what your hourly charge out rate is. So rather than you spending time that you could be spending on your business, improving it, reconciling accounts, you probably, it's not your specialty, so you're probably missing things anyway. Leave it with us. We'll do it correctly. And then as you grow, we can be there for you. And I think one of the other advantages of having a firm like us, as opposed to just hiring an in-house bookkeeper, for example, is if your in-house bookkeeper gets sick and you need to do payroll, right? That's back on the business owner. But if we have that scenario, so we're doing your payroll, for example, and one of our team members is sick, we have 30 team members in the Philippines. So we can work as a team to fill those gaps. So you don't need to worry about things getting done. We're on top of the due dates, the lodgements. That's our responsibility.
Yeah. Because ultimately, if your business is winning, then we're winning. We really want to create like a long-lasting partnership with all of our clients. So yeah, and even if that means that you need more hands-on help, we can even help hire you a professional that's qualified through our offshore team members.
Yeah, I've been hearing lots about offshore employees. Why do you think there's such a big demand for offshore employees?
I think it's because businesses are they're swamped at the moment. They don't have enough hours in the day. They need a lot more help with the admin or maybe some of the, lower responsibilities, but they genuinely can't afford an Australian person's wages. So I think that's when they start turning to offshoring, and that's why there's created such a big demand for it.
And what makes you guys specifically qualified to talk about offshoring staff?
Well, unlike a lot of other businesses online that are starting to get into offshoring, we've actually built our own offshore team for our business for 11 years now. So we have 30 team members in the Philippines full time. We've been doing that the whole time we've been in business. And so we understand what it takes to build a culture, to build a team, to understand all the different logistics about the Philippines, how it works. Also systems, training, all the principles. We understand that firsthand. And we've actually had some clients in our original business offering where we were doing bookkeeping as dedicated staff members for their businesses and actually building out their teams for their businesses. So that's been working. Some of them are coming up to 6 or 7 years now with their own team that we've hired through us that work in their businesses. And that's why just recently we've actually come up with a side business, iCountPan's Outsourcing, which is focused specifically on dedicated team members offshore to the Philippines, where we do the recruitment and help integrate them into your businesses.
So if someone was interested in getting this service, what would the process look like?
So firstly, we sit down with the business owner and really spend the time to work out what you need. So what is the role? What is the job description? What kind of person are you looking for? How do they fit within your business culture? How is this role adaptive? Does this need to be someone who's like a team lead, or is this someone who's going to plug into your existing team within the business? Then what we do is we come up with that job description. We handle the recruitment process and we'll shortlist the top picks for you that we think be the most suitable. Then we do an interview process together. And then you come back and say, look, we feel like this person's the right fit for our business. And then, we'll take all the rest from there.
Yeah. And we worry about all the fiddly stuff, like say the HR, the IT setup, equipment setup, all the support, stuff like that. So yeah, you don't have to worry about all of that. We take the headache out of it. It's designed to be a really seamless onboarding. So yeah, we just look for the people that already have experience, in your industry, and they kind of just slot right in.
Okay, so you've got iCountBeans outsourcing. Does a client have to use your accounting and bookkeeping services too?
No. So traditionally, we only had iCountBeans accountants and bookkeepers. And for a couple of our clients who were already our clients through that, we had some dedicated team members working in their business on bookkeeping and admin tasks. And that was really successful. But now, since we've started iCountBeans outsourcing, that's a whole separate business. And you do not need to be a client of accountants and bookkeepers to be able to utilize the outsourcing business.
All right. Well, that's a wrap. Thanks, Martelle and Michael from iCountBeans for sharing your point of view on all these finance topics. If you're a business owner looking for assistance, check out icountbeans.com.au for more information.
iCountBeans, accountants and bookkeepers.